Hi class, today we are looking at lesson 3 from chapter 3, What Was Life Like for People in New England? Seeking Religious Freedom. In England in the 1600s, it was a crime to belong to any church other than the Church of England. Members of the church, called separatists, however, wanted to set up their own churches and make their own rules. As a consequence, many members of the church were arrested and fined. In the early 1600s, a group of separatists decided to move to the Netherlands to escape persecution. This group later became known as the Pilgrims. Eventually, the Pilgrims decided to leave the Netherlands. Historians disagree over exactly why the Pilgrims left, but some reasons include Pilgrims' parents concerned that their children would lose their English identity and fear of war breaking out between Spain and the Netherlands. The Pilgrims decided to venture to the New World, not to enrich themselves or to explore, but to find a safe place to practice their religion. They asked the English government permission to settle in Virginia, and the London Company agreed to pay for their passage. In return, the Pilgrims had to send resources such as timber, fish, and furs back to the company. And here we have a picture, or a painting, I should say, and it says that Pilgrims were departing on the Mayflower in 1620. Let's take a look at the timeline here. In 1620, Pilgrims on the Mayflower arrive at Plymouth in what is now Massachusetts. Puritans in 1630 established settlement at Boston. In 1636 through 1637, we have the Pequot War. In 1636, Providence Colony is established in what is now Rhode Island. In 1675 to 1676, King Philip's War happened. And in 1692, we had the Salem witch trials. In the 1700s, we had the First Great Awakening. All right, let's take a look at our map here. And in the green area, we have the New England colonies, and that's a settlement right there. So these dots right here are the settlements that the colonists made. And this area here would be where the first colonies were at. And that's going to be in the, remember, if we looked at the entire map here of the United States, this little box right there is this box right here. All right, let's take a look at the next page. The Pilgrims. In September of 1620, 120 men, women, and children set sail from Plymouth, England on a ship named the Mayflower. These pilgrims faced a number of hardships on their 66-day voyage across the Atlantic Ocean, including storms and rough seas, disease, and hunger. When they finally caught sight of land, they realized that they had not landed in Virginia as they had planned. Instead, they were hundreds of miles north at Provincetown in northern Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The Pilgrims were changing the rules of their original agreement by settling in a different area. Led by William Bradford, the colonists drew up a new contract for their community. This document, called the Mayflower Compact, provided the outline of a new government. This was one of the first steps towards self-government in colonial North America. The Pilgrims did not decide on a location for their settlement right away. In the early days, they lived on board the Mayflower. They eventually chose Plymouth, named by Captain John Smith a few years earlier. They arrived in late December at the start of a brutal winter. They were without experience, low on supplies, and utterly unprepared for the weather. Half of the Pilgrims died that winter due to starvation, disease, and the cold. Primary source. In their words, Mayflower Compact 1620. Having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one of another, we combine ourselves together for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. All right, let's take a look at the next page. The new colony seemed doomed. But in the spring, they befriended a Pautanux man named Squanto, who had been living with the Wanapog people. Squanto spoke English and taught the Pilgrims how to survive. He showed them how to plant corn and use fish to fertilize the soil. He taught them how to trap animals, catch fish, and find oysters. William Bradford called Squanto a special instrument sent from God. The Pilgrim settlement thrived and grew. And here we have an artist's interpretation of what the Mayflower looked like. So you can see this is a cutaway of the ship, and you can see people for context of the size of the ship. And the bottom here would be where all the cargo was stored. And yeah, it's a small, cramped area. Not a fun way to spend 66 days going across the ocean. The Mayflower Compact. When the Pilgrims wrote the Mayflower Compact, it was the first government framework written in a land that is now the United States. It was signed by only some of the colonists, the men. At the time, women rarely held positions of authority in civic or religious life. As a result, they did not have the opportunity to sign such important documents. The purpose of the document was to bind the Pilgrims together. However, the Mayflower Compact did not include any laws. Instead, those who signed it were pledging to follow the laws that would later be enacted by the Pilgrims' small system of self-government. And here we have a picture. The caption reads, "The Pilgrims signing the Mayflower Compact." And on the next page, it has some things that you can go back and do later about deciding, working in small groups, establishing a new settlement, giving your settlement a name, and so on. So take time with your partner later to do that. The Puritans. The Pilgrims were not the only group to flee religious persecution in England. A group of Puritans made their own journey to North America in 1629. Unlike the Pilgrims, the Puritans planned to land in Massachusetts. When they arrived in 1630, they founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They named their first settlement Boston. Another difference between the Pilgrims and the Puritans was that the Puritans had not separated from the Church of England. The Puritans believed God had chosen them to create a religious community that was purer than the ones in England. The Puritans worked hard to show that their community was a success. They also worked hard just to survive. While most Puritans were farmers, they also made most of what they needed. However, such as flour, barrels, horseshoes, cabinets, saddles, and shoes. Because of the abundance of the good lumber in New England, shipbuilding eventually became an important part of the economy. The industry was successful in part because of slave labor. Slaves were also put to work in shops and on farms. Massachusetts was the first colony to legalize slavery in 1641. By 1750, it was legal across all of the original 13 colonies. Massachusetts did not outlaw slavery until 1783. And here we have a picture of the colony. It says the Puritans organized their villages so that each one had a school and a common building that served as both meeting house and church. And here we have a salt box house was a common type of home in Puritan villages. And this is a cutaway again of the house right here, and you can see the bedrooms would typically be upstairs, and downstairs would be the living area with the dining and kitchen. Puritan leaders wanted each settlement to be a city upon a hill, which meant its residents had to live up to high moral standards. In an effort to enforce the rules, Puritan leaders required each family to sign a covenant with the church. If a family broke the covenant, it had to leave the settlement. Puritan children were taught the value of hard work from an early age. Young children were expected to work around the house. They also learned to read, because Puritans believed everyone should be able to read the Bible. By age 12, girls did the same chores as women, such as churning butter, spinning and dyeing cloth, and making soap and candles. Girls usually did not get any additional schooling. Boys helped with the farm animals, chopped wood, and picked vegetables before going to school. At school, some had the chance to learn another language, such as Latin or Greek. Boys also began to learn a trade, such as blacksmithing or printing. Life for Puritan women consisted mostly of managing the home and raising children. Most women were not allowed to own property, and they were supposed to be obedient to men. They were not allowed to participate in town government. Only men could vote in town meetings, in which they decided issues and made laws. Although the Puritans founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony on the principles of religious freedom, they were not tolerant of dissension among their own members. Roger Williams told leaders they should not take land that belonged to the American Indians. He also thought that the colony should allow other religions to be practiced. Believing Williams' ideas were dangerous, Puritan leaders banished him. In 1636, Williams founded Providence, now the capital of Rhode Island. In 1637, Anne Hutchinson was put on trial for arguing that people should be allowed to interpret the Bible themselves. Hutchinson was forced to leave Massachusetts. She founded a new settlement now called Portsmouth, Rhode Island. I know it looks like a mouth, but they say Smith. I don't know why. Anyways, back to the story. Oh, this would be Anne Hutchinson on trial, a painting of that. In 1692, the Puritans' strict moral codes led to one of the darkest episodes in their history. 3 girls in Salem fell mysteriously ill. They blamed 3 women for using witchcraft on them, and other accusations soon followed. From June to September, the Puritans tried and hanged 19 people for witchcraft. Finally, a higher court stepped in to stop the trials. Events like these left some Puritans yearning for more independence from the church. In the 1700s, ministers like John Wesley, Jonathan Edwards, and George Whitefield began to preach in a dramatic, emotional style. They emphasized the importance of faith over actions. They and their followers created the Baptist and Methodist churches, which focused on ordinary people who had not been attending church regularly. This movement, called the First Great Awakening, led many away from Puritanism. All right, let's take a look at the next page. American Indian Relations. And here we have a picture, and it says, Squanto teaches the Pilgrims to farm. The New England colonists had both positive and negative encounters with local American Indians. The Pilgrims' relationship with Squanto and the Wampanoag people made the difference between the survival and extinction of their new colony. To give thanks for their survival, the Puritans and Wampanoag had a 3-day festival to celebrate the good harvest. This feast would later be called the First Thanksgiving. The Wampanoag brought deer, and Pilgrims brought turkey, goose, duck, and a variety of vegetables and fruits. Not all relationships between New England colonists and local American Indians were friendly, however. In 1637, the Pequot people of Connecticut and the English settlers went to war over trade disputes. The settlers were aligned with the Narragansett and Mohegan people. These two peoples disliked the Pequot for their strict control of trade in the previous decades. At first, the two sides seemed evenly matched in what came to be called the Pequot Wars. The English had superior weapons, but the Pequot had knowledge of the land. In the end, however, the English defeated the Pequot. Many of the Pequot people taken prisoner by the English were sold into slavery. Here we have a caption that reads, Metacomet, also called King Philip of the Wampanoag people. Despite the promising beginning to the Pilgrims' relationship with the Wampanoag, Narragansett, and Mohegan peoples, the colonists soon became enemies with these groups. The American Indians were angered by the increasing number of new colonists who were settling on their lands. By 1675, these tensions resulted in a bloody conflict called King Philip's War. King Philip was the name that the English settlers gave to the Wampanoag leader Metacomet. Metacomet's father Massasoit had helped the Pilgrims survive their first harsh winters. However, the colonists' desire for more and more territory changed their relationship with the Wampanoag for the worst. Thousands of people died in King Philip War. Metacomet was eventually killed and his family was sold into slavery. In their brutal conquest of the American Indians, the English showed they were capable of seizing land and maintaining power. The war marked the end of any resistance to English colonization of New England. Did you know? You might have thought the English Pilgrims and the Wampanoag celebrated the first Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Many historians, however, believe that it was actually French settlers who began this tradition. The French had colonized the area that is now Jacksonville, Florida. They held a Thanksgiving service in 1564, which was 57 years before the Pilgrims arrived. Spanish colonists in El Paso, Texas also celebrated Thanksgiving services in 1598. In 1619, English colonists first held the feast we know best today. All right, boys and girls, go back, reread any sections that you missed, or rewatch the video, and as always, I'll see you soon.